recapture the flavor of what we did beginning in 1992 in Newark. Well, actually, we began earlier than that, but the Fireball started in 1992. In the early 90s, quite frankly, people were dying. And we still had a situation in Newark where no hospitals, very few hospitals, I think there was only two that would accept HIV patients at the time. We didn't even know it was still a gay-related disease, and contributed to gay men, and then it became attributed to Haitians, and then it became everything except caring for people who were ill and people who were dying. At the time, I was a part of a group known as Black and White Men Together that started in 1980. And in 1990, after 10 years of traveling back and forth, like a lot of us were doing back in those days and still do today, to New York, I was working with Black and White Men Together around the issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, and ultimately HIV/AIDS. The group got a call because no one was doing that kind of work in Newark. And I was with the group, and because I was in a group that was mixed with black and white, I was learning a lot about the disease. And I felt at the time that I had to do something. So I decided that I would stop going to New York every week when we got a call, and the group in New York asked me to be one of the people to come to Newark and to do a hot, horny, healthy, safer sex workshop. Patty Pendavis was the person who called us. Patty was from the House of LaBelle, and she called and asked for help because she was seeing so many of her family and friends dying. In 1992, Barbara Ford and I wrote a grant to the state of New Jersey Department of Health to do a project in Newark of hot, horny, healthy, wet, wild, well, safer sex messaging. And it wasn't hot, horny, healthy, wet, wild, well. It was just hot, horny, healthy because we were targeting men. But we expanded to wet, wild, well for women because that's who we were. We were working with women and we needed help. And we're going to be talking about all of this in a little while. But it became Project Fire. And why we named it Project Fire, we thought it was very important to do symbols that were crucial to our people and crucial to our survival as a people, and that is remembering our history. This is the first publication of homosexual love among black people in America. And it was this magazine called Fire by Bruce Nugent. He's the one who wrote the article. So we started Project Fire. This is a t-shirt from Project Fire. This is the Safer Sex Handbook that we did the work, they did the training for those who were involved. And when we came to do a workshop, we had a table like this, and we also had the red, black, and green liberation flag because we felt that people will be liberated when they learn that it's okay to handle safer sex toys, to learn how to be safe, and learn how to enjoy sex, because sex is such a taboo subject in America, but everywhere you go, everywhere you see, sex is all over the place. And we felt it was crucial that we teach people that sex is good, sex is fun, but you have to do it safe, and you have to be responsible in your sexual behavior. And these are the toys we use. We still have them. They have been in my closet for several years now, just sitting there, and my husband didn't even know I had them until today.
Yeah, right. Sure, they made it go.
Just sitting there.
Some things stay in the closet. So these are some of the toys we actually used back in the day. And we had condom races. So if you were part of our, and we also had, by the way, we had some in the dorms here, because students, I was told, Dean Credle, those kids are over there sucking and bucking and nobody's telling them they better be safe. So we had some safer sex workshops, a home health party. That's the other key thing about it. We would pay people to have a home health party. And what we would do is we pay you $100 and give you some money to purchase food, and then you bring in at least 15, 20 people, and then we would have people intimately involved, and some people would even bring their children, like 14, 13, 12 years old, beginning to have sex, and they would bring their children to those workshops, because we were talking about how to be safe, and that didn't have a limitation on age and sexuality and all of those stuff that goes with it. So these are the toys, and we're going to talk about the history with these people. So I want someone to help me, because this will distract us from our discussion. So we're going to move this out of the way.
Gender Studies program here, and it is my pleasure to just sort of get the ball rolling by giving our thanks to the various sponsors, and then I'll introduce our moderators who will take over from there. So this panel has been put on by a collaborative effort involving the Office of Student Life, LGBTQ Diversity Resources Center, run by Marin Greathouse, who I believe is out there and who deserves a lot of gratitude for the work she does for queer students and allies on our campus here. It's also being sponsored by the Women's and Gender Studies program, the History Department, and the Queer Newark Oral History Project, which several of us in the room are involved in, trying to begin to really document Newark's queer history through long-form oral history interviews with people. A few of our panelists had actually done them with us already. So if that's something that's of interest to anybody in the room, just get in touch with me afterwards. I would be happy to get you, kind of connected to the project in one way or another. And that being said, I think I can cede the floor to our moderators. Kristyn Scorsone is a grad student in the history department here, and Naomi Extra in the American Studies program, and they'll be running the show, asking questions of our various very accomplished panelists. So I'll give you guys the floor, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Introduction?
Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bernard McAllister. I'm known as Bernie Jourdan, Bernie Ebony. As far as ballroom is concerned, I think I'm as big as it almost gets, huh?
And so humble.
And I'm so humble. But that's who I am. I've been an activist in Newark for over 30 years. I don't know who was here earlier, but the kids that were on the panel, they're mine. I have over 40 gay children. I've buried at least 25 people, children of mine. Well, I call them my children, but they come into your home, they come into your house. I was the house mother. They were my children, and I've buried many people through this course of the ballroom scene. So yeah, that's me.
Brittany, before you move on to someone else, tell them about houses and what that means. What's the purpose of houses?
Okay, I like to equate houses to almost like frats, but there's a difference. When we first started, when I first got into the ballroom scene had already been out for maybe about 30 years prior to me coming into the scene. And we didn't have the internet, we didn't have so much inclusion as you guys are able to have now. At the time, being gay really meant that you would be put out your home. It was very high that your family would attack you. And so what houses did, it brought people together as a safe zone. And you belong to a house, so that meant you belong to a family. And you also can equate it to almost like gangs, because we was called gangs. I was a little rough, got hit around the edges then, and a little. And we bonded together and we stuck together. We slept, when I say slept, we slept in the same home together, we ate together, we shared happiness, we shared sadness. We all had some type of hurt that would made us like bonded because, we were rejected by society, by family, we were taunted, we was laughed at, and there was only two things you could do. You could either roll over and play dead, or you can pick up a stick and hit them back. So as you can see, I'm still here. I hit many people with sticks. And that's how I survived the onslaught. And as I grew, the house grew. We went from maybe 10 people to maybe 70 at one time at the height of the house. When I first started walking balls, there were maybe 10 houses. Right now there's maybe 50 to 60 houses. We're in Russia. I have house members in Australia, London, Paris. So I've been doing this a long time. And again, I think people don't quite understand, you know, it's easy to say, oh, I'm sick now and I can go to the doctor. But when you were sick then and you had no one but your house members, there was no social workers coming to the house saying, well, oh, we have housing for you, because there was no housing. Most people didn't even have insurance, and there was definitely no Obamacare. So you were basically on your own to survive any way that you could survive. And what was strange about it, we were in the richest country in the world, and we were at war. I didn't even know I was at war until the war ended. I was like, whoa, that was war. Because the casualties, and this is not exaggeration, I've lost, and these are close personal friends, I've lost over maybe 70, 80 friends in the last 25 to 30 years. You know how crazy that is? It sounds crazy now, but at the time it was so, I don't even know if it was devastating, because you were surviving. You were trying to survive this. And every day you were just like making it. I remember one time there was about 7 to 9 funerals in 1 week.
Yes.
And it was just devastating. And I'm talking about pretty young men. They were 18, 17 years old, James, you know, and they were shriveling up, dying. And there was nobody to fight for them. There was nobody to say, wait a minute, hold up, we have rights. It was really difficult time. And I come from a loving family, thank God. You know, I was fortunate that my mother accepted me, my family accepted me. But even then, it was rough, because I was still ostracized then, because they always pointed, oh, that's the gay cousin. That's the one who hang with the drags, and all these things. It was never full acceptance. And I really need to say, too, it really wasn't full acceptance until I accepted myself first. You know, that was the first thing. But it was a really rough time. Yeah, the 80s was a bitch. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the 90s.
All right, I come from a different perspective. My name is Gwendolyn Davis, and at that time, during the late 80s and 90s, I worked as a health educator at the Newark Health Department. I worked for the city for a while, and then I worked for the state. At the health department, we were talking about some strange, extraordinary disease that was going around, but nobody knew what was really going on. Earlier in 1983, one of our supervisors went to a conference at CDC and came back with this message that something was killing young men, and that nobody knew what was going on. In fact, as I recall now, there were people that were at the health department themselves that had this mysterious illness. And you could see them deteriorating right before your eyes, and you didn't know what was going on, and the doctors didn't know what was going on. So that was the high point. I was the health educator, but I only talked about sexually transmitted diseases. And at that time, they hadn't quite identified HIV as being a sexually transmitted disease when I started back in the early 80s. By the time they got the blood test in 1985, then we were able to determine, yes, some of these people are getting infected through having sexual contact. And then that became like my role. Then I had to talk to people, not only were they getting syphilis, but they were also getting gonorrhea, and we also were talking about chlamydia, and a host of other sexually transmitted diseases that nobody was really recognizing. There were people coming into the clinic. I should say that I was kind of naive when I first started out working as a health educator. First of all, I didn't get to work for the city of New York till I think I was 34 when I started my job. And I was excited that I was going to talk about venereal disease, because that's what it was at that time. they've changed the name, I think, 3 times since then, but it all comes down to the same thing. But I thought that I was going to see prostitutes and pimps. Because regular people didn't get diseases. And that was what I had made up in my mind. That's how naive I was and how backwards I was. And then I was shocked when I got to the clinic and there were young men and women, there were housewives, there were gay people, there were all kinds of people that was really being attacked with sexually transmitted diseases. So that was my beginning. But when HIV and AIDS came along, excuse me, I knew I had to do more. And that's when I became we had to take a test and had to go through a large examination to be an HIV counselor. So then I was an STD counselor and an HIV counselor combined. And then after that kind of exposed me to what was really going on in our community. And I knew that I had to do something even more. So that's when it was time for me to join community organizations. So I joined, I think it was, I can't think of the name of the organization now, but it was all women's organization. Not a WUCA, not a WUCA at first. I joined a different organization that had all women, of course, and they had one black woman there. And she started the African American WUCA organization because nobody was really talking about women, period. Women had been like pushed to the background. So no one was discovering whether or not they were getting infected, but they were getting infected because they had, well, as they say now, that they had husbands or boyfriends that were in a closet that were having sex with men and not telling them and exposing them to the disease. So women were getting the infection. And this one black woman that belonged to this organization, she was already infected. And part of it was drugs because she was out there. And then part of it was through sexual contact. So that began my history with other organizations. So there was a African American Women United Confronting AIDS. And that's at that time I met James Credle. And we started working together, trying to reach as many people as we could with the message that safer sex, you have this dreadful disease that's attacking your body for something that is so pleasurable as sexual contact. Yeah. So I felt it was my duty to try to explain to people what they could do. So like James just showed you all his little trinkets over there on the table. I had a few trinkets of my own. In fact, I had my trinkets stuck in a closet. My daughter found them one time. She wasn't sure what kind of job I had. But it's been an interesting ride. And I also will tell you about the ball. That was my first experience. I was an only child, so I was kind of closed off from a lot of what was going on in the world. So the ball was an explosion for me, and I just loved it, and I still love it right today. It was educational, especially at that time, because during the time that I went to the ball, we were all talking about HIV and AIDS. That was the subject. There was nothing else to talk about, that people were dying, and that we needed to educate our people more. So part of the ball was also educational, as well as a lot of fun. And you know what? I'm going to stop talking and move over to someone else.
Good evening. I'm Peter Savastano. I'm an associate professor of the anthropology of religion, consciousness, sexuality, and gender at Seton Hall University. I'm also a native of Newark. I grew up here, and I actually live one town away in nearby Bloomfield, which might as well be Newark. And I've been involved in AIDS activism since the very early 1980s. At the time, I was working down at University Hospital at what was UMDNJ, now part of Rutgers University. And as Gwen said, there was this strange disease. When they finally started to figure out that something was going on, the name they gave to it was GRID, gay-related infectious disease. And this was a period of time where people who were at University Hospital, particularly with the symptoms of this disease that they knew very little bit about, but had a lot of stigma around it because it was associated with homosexuality. And also there were other high-risk groups. Among them were hemophiliacs, Haitians, and intravenous drug users. The logic of some of these risk groups many years later continues to baffle and defy me, but nevertheless those were the categories. And it was also a time where even the staff of the hospital would not bring people their food, would not go into their rooms, were covering themselves in all kinds of safety, protective clothing, and there was a small group of us working down at University Hospital who decided that more needed to be done, so we formed something called the AIDS Friendship Group. This was around 1984 and 1985, and on our lunch hours, we would give up our lunch hour and go around and visit with those people who were in the hospital suffering. We would bring them their food. We would sit and talk with them and also witness horrific suffering. This was a time when there was no treatment, no protease inhibitors, none of the kinds of cocktails that we have now. And I left University Hospital to go to graduate school. I was particularly interested in the religious and spiritual lives of LGBT persons. And we had gotten a rather large grant. I went to graduate school at nearby Drew University in Madison, New Jersey. I was a student in the theological school there. And we got a number of grants over, I would say, a 10 or 11 year period. And those grants were to study every aspect of religious life in and around the city of Newark. And we trained students to interview people, to take their oral histories. We did a number of documentary interviews with people in the community. I personally worked very closely with various houses in Newark, most closely with the House of Vizcaya, the House of Jourdan, and the House of Exotique. And there was a trade-off. The trade-off was, we will work with you, but then you have to participate in our life in whatever way that you can, including you have to walk in the balls, you have to come to the balls, you have to do all those kinds of things. So that was a trade-off that myself and one other graduate student, or I should say an agreement that we accepted, and we did. And one of the things that we would do is collaborate, for example, with Project Fire. James, Patrick, Bernie, Gwen, we all worked very closely together over those years. We did various kinds of fundraisers. It seemed like we were in 2 and 3 meetings a week. We had a number of different projects. We would go to these little mini balls that would take place at 2 o'clock in the morning with 20 people there. And we would go to these much larger balls, the Fireball, every year as well. One of the things that we did from the Newark project up at Drew is we had a videographer who would go around and he would film while some of us would interview people participating in the balls about why they were there, what the balls meant to them. We also sponsored a number of what we called memorial projects at the time. So we would create categories within the context of the ball where people would be asked to memorialize those members of their house families who had died from HIV and full-blown AIDS. And we began to build an archive. I personally did a number of ethnographic interviews with mothers and fathers of the houses, grandfathers and grandmothers of the houses, many children of the houses, about their spiritual lives, about their religious lives, about their suffering because of religion, about how they dealt with what it means to have a spirit and yet be totally excluded from any kind of institutional religious life. This was a time when if someone died of HIV, there was nowhere for them to have a funeral. Often their families had rejected them or would arrange for them to have a funeral, but with no mention of the reality of their lives, of what their sexuality was, of what they had suffered, none of those kinds of things. So it was a very deeply moving, but also a very painful experience in a lot of ways, because we were asking big questions, life and death questions, and it brought everything into the conversation: race, gender identity, class, sexuality, so much, the nature of human spirituality, all of those kinds of things. So that's about all I'll say for now.
Well, I'm sitting here where you guys are refreshing my memory of a lot of things. My name is Patrick Kelly, and I'll give you the short version because we're all long-winded up here, but I'll be short. I was one of the first health educators, not just in New Jersey, but in the country. I always say, and some people may disagree, but I always say thank God that they recognized the disease as a white gay disease first. Even though we knew that there were people that were dying, but we didn't know what they were dying. They were African American, Latinos dying as well, but we didn't know where they was from. So I say that because that's how we wound up getting money. Because somebody, the gay white kids, they weren't underserved or underprivileged. They were people of privilege. And their mothers was telling them congressmen and all them senators and everybody, you better do something for my child, or you can't come up in here tonight. So from out of nowhere, all this money finally came through the Center for Disease Control through Atlanta, and they funded 3 places first. They funded San Francisco, New York City, and New Jersey. And people say, well, why New Jersey? New Jersey's right next door to New York. And the reason why was because the mode of transmission in everywhere else in the world was through sex. But the major mode of transmission in New Jersey was through IV drug use. Right. So what happened was, I, at the time, was working as a therapist counselor in a drug residential treatment facility, openly gay. So they knew. So the state came and said, we have this money, we need to do this and do that. So that's how they came to me at my job, and they all asked me if I wanted to do it. I said, sure. Didn't know what I was getting into at the time. Had no idea that how vicious this thing was going to become. And then when you start to think about sex, drugs, crossing over a line, black, white, everybody interacting with each other, I'm not surprised that the numbers are where they're at today. But the main job that I had was to go out and get people. Hospitals, like they said, would not take. Ambulances would pick people up and find out they had HIV and would literally drop them on the ground and leave them. Would actually leave them there. People were living in hotels out outside of the hotels, on motels on New Jersey Turnpike. I had to go get people up in roofs that was in projects, that was living up on the top of the roofs, because they're families. Now, I knew families wouldn't kick the kids out for nothing. By doing drugs and everything, as soon as they heard age, they started kicking them out. So my responsibility was, there was only 3 places that I could take them. It was St. Michael's, University, and the drug treatment program. And that was a Catholic organization in Paterson, New Jersey, called Straight and Narrow. So that's what I was doing. Pete, you said grid, but they was naming that thing a whole bunch of things. The slim disease, the waist syndrome. There was a whole lot of things that was going on at that time that was really sad. I didn't know what to do. I was really, really petrified about what I was seeing. I'm talking about women. I saw women walking around in the drug program with their hair was falling out. A guy would weigh 210 on Monday and weigh 150 on Saturday. You know, and it sounds like an exaggeration, but that's how this disease was literally taking people away. So, forgot.
Do your cell phones, get them out of your head.
Yeah, put your cell phones on vibrate. Let somebody make love to you tonight. So I was in a tough situation. So all of a sudden, my job had went from a therapist to a health educator, and I found myself actually having to go into the schools, educating them. It's funny because the teachers thought I was just there for the students, because somehow they was excluding themselves, until I woke them up and said, wait a minute, how many people in this room are having sex? I said, including the adults. I said, well, each and every one of you are at risk for contracting this disease. So I wind up coming to Rutgers. I told you I'm going to give you a short version. I wind up coming to Rutgers to do a presentation. And I met this wonderful man here, Dean Credle. And after that, I became an activist. I became everything, you know, everything. I was the first chair for Project Fireball. God, Lord Jesus, it was just so much that we did. But the important thing that I wanted to really speak about the ball, what really grabbed me was, it wasn't so much the trophies and the money for the ball. When we first started Project Fire, every category in the ballroom had something to do with HIV education and prevention. Every house had to come up with some, remember Bernie, the creativity, had to come up with some creativity on how. So what we were doing, we were letting them have fun, but also teaching them at the same time that it was important. And also at the balls, we didn't just have the ball, we also had access. We had all the organizations, the health departments and them that were offering these services, whether it was for rent, help them with rent, help them with medication to get them wherever they could. Well, back that time they only had one thing, and that was AZT. AZT was the only top pill that they had. And that drug
was a mess.
Was a mess because the only people, I don't really want to say a mess, I'll say that what they did was the only people that was in the trial for AZT, which was a quick trial and a quick sample of the drug, was gay white men. And they saw some reaction in the gay white men, so that's when they started giving it as well to the blacks and the Latinos. Now, some people may say they killed them, though it wasn't what it was supposed to do, but I don't have any proof that they did those things. But that was the first drug, AZT. And the funny thing about it, they had it locked up for 9 years. Couldn't no one else make a cocktail. Remember that? No one else could make that cocktail. But AZT was just like methadone when they first started treating heroin addicts for methadone. They didn't know how much to give them. They were walking out like zombies. They were giving them so much.
Remember the eyes would get crossed?
Oh, yes.
Like the drug was so strong, you literally, your eyes would go cross. And I mean, like, I'm looking at you and your eyes start moving like this, and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And that was, the medicine was, whoa.
Yeah. They didn't know the right dosage.
No, they didn't.
No. So the short thing is that, I wish I could say short, but the thing that really gets to me is that the numbers that they have, even though they don't surprise me, it still saddens me. There's too many people still dying. There's too many people still getting infected with this disease. And I would just hope that, I'm old now. I know I don't look it, but I am. I'm up there. I'm retired now, and I actually flew in from Florida because the asked me to on your private jet, on your private jet, Deacon. So, you know, and I just want to try to do as much as I possibly can. Anytime I can get a chance to speak on the importance of what I always do, I always reach out to you, to all of you. I'm not Idi Amin, but I'm going to say that you're either part of the problem or you're either part of the solution. There is no middle ground. You have to do something. This disease is continuously getting worse. Our government are cutting grants more and more and more, and it's not surprising to me because the numbers are changing. It's no longer white gay men up here and everybody else is here. It's white gay men are here, and you have the Latin and the African American and the women who are moving up fast, who are catching up fast. So we need to really try to, if you do anything tonight, if just walk away asking yourself, what can I do? What can I do to help? Because God knows we need the help from all of you. And I'll have plenty more to say. My jacket is this long, but I don't want to do it all.
Well, I've just been asked, and I think that we will do that very quickly. I've just been asked. We have some special guests here tonight, the youth who were in the panel today, but they have to leave pretty quickly. And we had asked them if they would come and do a quick performance. So after all of this heavy-duty stuff, why don't we have them do a quick performance? Get a little levity here. That don't take away from the seriousness of the discussion, but we'll show you what you're after. Benny, will you do that for us?
Performance categories, but different genres.
Well, we're giving them the bad news, then you see them maybe 6 months later, you don't even recognize them. This is how fast they would deteriorate.
And remember the baby hair?
Yes.
Well, yes. Caucasians probably don't know this,
right.
But the sisters, the black people over here, y'all know what baby hair is.
Yeah.
When you get there, when they used to wear it down the side.
Okay.
But you know, that was the sign that even if you didn't get tested, you knew that something was going on with you because your hair texture changed.
Yes, it did.
And we would walk past people like, ooh.
Oh, but another thing while they're getting ready, like everybody today, everybody wants to have these bodies. You see everybody's in the gym and running. That stemmed from people were running in the gyms because they didn't want people to think that they had HIV.
Right.
You spoke a little bit about it, Patrick, I think.
Well, one of the things that we did was we were involved. Well, let me go back this way. I belong to a group called Black and White Men Together, and then we started a group here called PACT, People of All Colors Together. And headed by this one right here again, he doesn't give half the credit that he deserves, and he doesn't want it, but I'm going to say it, and he can slap it later. But we all got together. We went down to the mayor's office, and we had people who was in city council who we went and visited. We didn't go down there yelling, screaming, cussing, and hollering. We went down there because as professionals, we went there and talked to them and said, this is what is going on here. And eventually, I can't remember those guys' names, but it was men as well as women that came on board and listened to what we were saying. They actually start coming to the balls to see exactly what we were talking about, what was going on. Someone would speak. Matter of fact, Cory Booker, for his first term, actually came to the ball.
He came to my ball.
Came to the ball to see what was going on and how important that was. And they saw that it was important. And the brief thing is that through building those relationships, even though I'm giving it to you in 2 minutes, it took a while to build those relationships, to get people really interested in it. And eventually, they did a lot. They started to do a lot for the gay community. They actually have, they hang the flag, right? Maybe you can speak more to that about what's going on at City Hall.
A flag raising ceremony, and we have a week-long program, and that makes Newark different than others. I know that people come out for the march on this Sunday, and people look around and say, well, where are all the people? But the strategy was that knowing the different communities in Newark, you have to reach them differently. And so that was the goal. We have a week-long program. So you're not going to have a big march like they do in New York on one day, because everything is happening during the week, and some of it is in the local communities, in the wards. And that was one thing I learned about Newark. Newark is not like other cities in the sense that you have divisions along wards, and even block by block sometimes, and people just don't understand.
And even amongst the gays.
Yeah, even among the gay community as well. Sometimes it's just block, 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 and that's just the reality. And so rather than fight that, you understand that in order to reach the people, you have to go into those wards and go into those communities with the people who live there, because the other part of that, the reason why they are so separated that way, is that outsiders have Newark been well known that when people come in to do things in Newark, they usually take their stuff with them, and the community is left without the resources to continue that fight or continue that struggle. So that's one of the things that's great about this Black Lives Matter movement, is they're understanding that, and people just got to get connected with that, because the Black Lives Matter talk about this issue, and that's why they have such complaints with the liberal whites in our society, because liberal whites come in and they want to run things and do things, and with your help or with that to help the community, but when they leave, the people who are left there don't have the skills that they should have in order to keep things doing. And so that's the new movement, and that's what people don't understand, and that's what people don't connect with, and that's why there's such issues around the Black Lives Matter movement right now.
Can I speak to the ballroom scene? For me, I think that we were ahead of our time in the sense that there weren't agencies out. And I'm going to give you a quick synopsis, so this is just my opinion. It's probably fact, but you can check it yourself. What the real deal is that we weren't really open to outsiders. People was dying from AIDS, and it was none of our, we were surviving, and that's what houses did in Jersey. We were living, we were surviving, we were burying ours, we're dropping people off at the hospitals. But when agencies came at us, we had a very unhealthy, we had an unhealthy fear of anybody that was outside of us, because we had been hurt so much. You understand what I'm saying? Back at this time, you could get beat up. The cops would stand there and let you get beat up. The cops would call you faggots and embarrass you if you happened to be a transgendered person. So there was no rights, except for some moral rights. Some cops were nicer than others, but in the end, you were still a fag. And that's how you were treated. So when the agencies came at ballroom people, we were like the last ones for them to tap into. Now, as far as Project Fire is concerned, they did it differently. They came at us as if, we are all one. But what happened over the years is that agencies found less people to test, because they made their money off testing and inclusionists. We need you to come test, because every time they tested, the government gave them money. So as you look around now, you see there's hundreds of agencies. And those agencies have ran out of people to test. So what they did was they came into the ballroom scene, because we were an untapped market. You could come to a ball and find 500 people to test. There was no other place where you could get that many gay people in an urban environment. And once they found out where their money was at, they took full advantage of that. GMHC, all the New York agencies, some of the founders became millionaires, and we know this. They became millionaires off the backs of blacks and Spanish and whites dying from AIDS. It became a business. And to this day, it's still a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business mixed with the government, the pharmaceutical companies, and the insurance companies. They run it as if it's a business, and don't ever believe that they're doing this out the kindness of their heart. There is profit in being sick. I'm a director of hospital support at Mount Sinai. There's millions and millions of dollars that's being spent on testing, patient experience, how we treat you. But guess what? All this, I'm not going to say it all started from AIDS, but AIDS was their foundation for which they're doing all this patient experience. How was your visit? What could we do for you? Because at one time, you couldn't even get in the hospital. I remember at UMD&J, if you wasn't sick enough, they would turn you away. If you could walk away, you out of here. And that's what it was. So the ballroom scene has always had a very uncomfortable relationship with any outside entity that claims to come and help. And it was to our detriment. A lot of times we didn't listen when people were offering us help, but there was also a very healthy fear that we knew that we were going to be taken advantage of. Just like Madonna took Vogue.
See, Stole it from us.
I ain't never seen her a day in my life until she made the video, and then, but we were voguing in basements. You know, and it's just like anything. Once a group of people, a minority group of people get it, be it women, Irish doing the jig, Italian cooking, they take it, make it mass marketing. The next thing you know, you got Chef Boyardee. You understand what I'm saying? It ain't really Italian, but it just got a little tomato sauce in it. And that was our reality.
What made it different? In fact, I keep being asked even today is about how do we really do that in Newark? How do we do the fireball? Because there's such strong competition between the houses. You know, the houses in terms of competition against each other. You know, they will slash you in a minute. But what we did as far as Project Fire, we pulled the houses together and let them decide what the ball is going to be. And then we work with them to decide exactly what types of things we like to see done, and then they decide what the categories are. And so that's what made the fireball different than any other ball that happened during that era, and even now today. And they're wondering across the nation and other places, how do y'all do it in Newark?
And we're the only ball that literally have all houses that work together. Because there's a lot of competition amongst houses. It's not always a healthy competition either.
Yeah, right.
It's just competition. Once you hit the runway, you are food.
Well, you know,
have to be ate.
To go back, and I know you might have one, but you probably got one now. I'll make this quick. To go back even in the beginning, when you talk about James, Don, and I were also on the governor's first HIV planning group in New Jersey. And baby, we had to fight to get that money. They wanted to send that money to the kindergarten and show them and make it out of blocks. They wanted to send that money everywhere but to the gay community. So eventually, and I'm a firm believer that when you're invited to the table, you better show up. Because if you don't show up, somebody's going to make a decision for you. And when they make that decision, and you were invited, you didn't show up, it ain't nobody's fault but your own. Stop crying. Take what they give you. But we fought to get that money so that we could come here, and we had to sit down. We scratched our head. We didn't know how we were going to do it. Because you can't just walk into because I know, being a gay man, I didn't trust everybody. You know, my family would have threw me out if they knew. I think they knew anyway, but you know how they say you don't tell, you don't say, you don't. But anyway, it was a job. It was a job. But sometimes, and I have to bring religion to them. Sometimes you just got to pray and say, God, send me the right people. And here you walk in the door, you walk in the door, you walk in the door. Angel, before he passed away in 2005, and there's a whole lot of other people that are not here who did a hell of a job of putting this all together, too. Imagine, as Bernie said.
They're not here because they're not here.
Because they're not here. You know, they're not here because they're not here. But there was a lot of hard work in the beginning, of fighting. But I just want to make one thing clear. It's not a black and white issue, because I don't want people to separate that to think it's black and it's white. It's not a black or white issue. It's the people who are making decisions about where our money goes.
It's the power and the powerless. And it's not about color. And once you put color on there, you miss the mark.
That's right.
I use black because at the time, still, they're the powerless.
Yeah.
A lot. Women, the powerless. And remember, there were white men at the top of the chain that was making decisions. And it reminds you much of the Republican Party about women and their bodies.
Right.
They want to make decisions about women, and Ronald Reagan wouldn't even mention AIDS. And they consider him one of the greatest presidents. What an asshole. He ain't do shit. He did nothing. Not for the urban community. He really didn't. He didn't mention AIDS, and people were dying left and right.
Falling out the street.
Another perfect example, Ed Koch, a gay man,
She showed
hated gay people, and was tricking on Christmas Street.
Yeah.
But you understand what I'm saying? So again, we were fighting battles in our own homes, with the gay people, with the people in power, and I can't emphasize enough when I put their hands up and imagine you sitting there with 6 of your friends and 3 of them die. You understand what I'm saying? And people, and I'll never forget, the Village Boys had this picture, I'll never forget. They had an illustration, and it was called the Blue something. And it was a caricature of a man sitting in the tub, and he drank. He was dying. He knew he was dying because he had lost maybe 150 pounds. He was only like 80 pounds wet. And the only way he could eat or drink is that he sat on the toilet or was in the tub. So he would drink the blue Caribbean drink, you know, the drink with the, he wanted that his last days with the umbrella and the cherry. And as he drank the blue drink, it came up out of him. So it was passing through. So the water turned blue. That's suffering. Imagine drinking water and it's coming straight out you. Imagine eating and it's just coming straight out. There was nothing to hold it. And it was nothing. It was nothing to go to a person's house and you'd be like, oh my God, they're dying. And half people didn't even go to the doctors because they were scared of the news. I remember, do anybody remember Cheryl Moore? Cheryl, she was, you know Cheryl, is it Miller or Moore? Cheryl Moore. Miller. Cheryl Miller. One of the best HIV nurses in the country. And I remember I was scared to go get tested. To be honest with you, I didn't go get tested until like maybe about 10 years ago. And then I had guilt that I'm a survivor, that I'm negative. I went through therapy because I'm negative, because I lived. I survived the onslaught. Because I call it, to me, it was our concentration camp. And Cheryl would tell people, everybody's not ready to be tested because you're not ready for the answer.
Right.
You know, and like you said, when you would tell people, and people would go home and jump off roofs. Imagine your friend, you'd be like, what is you? And they jump off the roof. They kill themselves because of a disease that was killing them anyway. Because the stigma and the ostracism that came from having AIDS was, it was so devastating, you would be stuck. Imagine being stuck and you would scream and nobody could hear you. And that's what it felt like. That's what it felt like.
Just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One is that this work has been so hard. And for me, it's been so hard because I'm a Vietnam veteran. And if you understand what happened in Vietnam, you'll know that we lost a lot of men of color, boys of color, during that war as well. And I was a frontline medic, so I watched that and I was participated in that happening. And this was in 1966, 67 when I was in Vietnam. And while I was in Vietnam, I was watching Newark, the 67 riots. I was watching Newark burn while I was in Vietnam. So that was part of the pain that I came to this struggle with in 1980. And what happened to me that was very, in some ways, lucky for me, is that the call that was made to MACT New York at the time that in 1980, when we learned about this grid stuff, I had a friend of mine. I was director of Office of Veterans Affairs, and I worked in Veterans Services here at the university. So we had a network of veterans offices throughout the country, and Mike Gold was the director at CUNY, and his wife's sister was the wife of Dr. Goddard, who was from NIMH. And he learned about this disease, and he needed a cohort of gay men to research. And what happened to me, that what reminded me of how I think that I never contracted the disease, because in 1982, I became part of a study group in New York of 16 men. And for 30 years, they followed us. And the first question they would ask us was our sexual behavior. And I'm a North Carolina boy from, from the black church, and I'm going to tell the truth. So if I'm going to be telling the truth, I better watch what I do, sexually and otherwise. So Gene Springer was watching his P's and Q's when he went out sexually, so I could tell the truth. And I think that that was my saving grace, because I too have tested negative throughout that time. So yeah, that's what happened to me. But the other point that I wanted to raise about this in terms of the painful stuff is also the great stuff, in the sense that we were smart enough as a group to form a underground medical dispensation system. So you talk about that. So
the Newark,
Peter would tell you about that one.
who had died in many cases, and we would redistribute them. We would get together under the guidance of a nurse at the time who was very knowledgeable about these things, and then we would actually send people out onto certain corners of the city to meet other people to give them medications that they did not have access to.
That's right.
And that was not easy, and one of the reasons why it wasn't easy was, I mean, first of all, we were doing something that we probably could have gotten in big trouble for at the time. But also because one of the other unique things about Newark, and I think about cities like Newark in general, is we sort of encountered the complexity of people's identities. For example, many of the people that we worked with, the men particularly, did not identify as being gay. They were men who had sex with men. And we had to learn to respect that category instead of saying all the usual things like, oh, just stop it, you know you're really gay and you need to come out of the category. We had to accept and understand, try to understand what people's sexual and gender identity was, and that it wasn't going to fit into the neat categories of sexual orientation that we had been culturally conditioned to think this is how it works. That wasn't how it worked. It was a lot more fluid, it was on a continuum, and this was not only about what the nature of people's sexual practices or desire was, it was also about their gender identity. And unless we could factor those elements in, and we had to figure out how are we going to reach these human beings, and we realized we have to let go of all of our conditioning. And this was regardless of what color your skin was, what your class was. This was a real issue for reaching people in Newark. It wasn't New York City, even though New York City is only 11.5 miles away. You know, for many people in Newark, gay identity meant white, bourgeois, privileged, middle class, not who many of the people in Newark were at the time.
I think that was like part of my job, was to break this down. Sex had nothing to do with male, female, men having sex with men, women having sex with women. That had nothing to do with it. Sex is sex. And as the song used to go, you love the one you're with. So it didn't really matter what you choose. You know, and here we are dealing with a devastating disease, and people want to separate people into categories, and that's not the way sex works. It's however you feel at the moment. At least that's the way it was then, before this devastating disease came along, and then we had to change some things. But Peter is absolutely right that there were men that were having sex with men. It was just a good feeling that they were having. They didn't identify as
no, because as soon as they were done,
right,
it was done. It was
yeah,
no, oh girl, I'm gonna meet you at the club.
Right.
It was like, no, you never met me, and I just happened to have sex with you, and
I got to go home to my
my
girl
wife
and 3
and
kids.
children.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
And I think that's something we don't talk about in the African American cultures or the Latin cultures a lot, about bisexuality. You know, we were so repressed. Well, I wasn't repressed, but people were so repressed with sex. And to me, I was lucky I came from a household where we talked about sex and healthy sex and all those things.
Right.
So when I saw people doing things, I would be like, oh, you don't have to do that. What you should do if it's painful, try it this way. And they were like, how you know? Oh, me and my mother looked it up. My mother would bring home books to me. And that was my thing, so that was my advantage in the situation. But I don't think that, I get upset when I hear people say, we want to talk about AIDS, the AIDS epidemic, and don't talk, and keep it happy. I have to talk about the pain.
Right.
I was sitting up here crying inside as I'm sitting here thinking about all the people I've lost. So to me, it was genocide.
Right.
Ronald Reagan represents genocide to me. Koch represents genocide to me. You know, I remember watching nurses laugh at people dying from AIDS, making jokes. You know, I remember those things. I remember people saying, "Oh, bitch, you're gonna die soon," and that was the joke. That was the ha-ha. That was the hit. I'm like, well, that ain't funny.
That's right.
You know,
And you get what you deserve.
and you get what. Oh, well, that was from them, the church and everything. And before we go any further, I just want to talk about the black church.
Oh, please.
Oh, gee.
That's another stuff.
She has a question.
Oh, don't get me started.
Go ahead, honey. Because we gotta have church up in here, so you better go ahead and ask your question.
I was just wondering, like, before you knew it was AIDS, what was the conversation in Newark? What did people think was going on? Like, it was starting to get sick and die.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew. As I said, where I worked at the health department, there were a couple of people there. I don't know, one of the gentlemen had been an IV drug user, but had changed his life up and was doing very well. And one of the other gentlemen used to come to the clinic just to be tested. We had no idea all of a sudden just became sick. And you could see him, like I said, deteriorating before your eyes. He would go to the doctor and they couldn't tell him what was wrong. And that was like a mystery, because you could see that things weren't right with him, and he would say, the doctor doesn't know what's wrong with me, it's just happening. But now when you think back about it,
And the weight loss was so
and the weight
great.
loss was devastating.
I remember
Well,
this
you know
queen
what?
told
You know what
us.
really brought it to their attention? You know who did more for HIV than anybody else? Yes.
Yeah,
And
Rock Hudson, Arthur Ashe, and Lou Ryan White.
right.
I would go with Ryan White and Rock Hudson. Arthur Ashe, he was there. He was Arthur Ashe, what a nice guy. But Rock Hudson had their asses full. And
Yeah, because the women was bored.
Yeah, and I think that's what really messed.
Saying all that was running to the hospital.
Yeah, and that's what really had
What was
that
the
going.
woman on
Dynasty.
On Dynasty,
You didn't
yeah.
wanna
What was
kiss
on
her.
Dynasty?
Joan Collins.
Yeah.
Not Joan Collins, the other one.
The one with
That
the
was
blonde
running-
hair.
The one that was putting Joan Collins behind for messing with her husband.
But you know what also too? I remember somebody
Kristyn,
told
yeah,
me
Kristyn.
if you ate broccoli, you could catch AIDS. To me and my best friend. So, and my mother brought home some Chinese food, and she said, "I brought you some chicken and broccoli." I said, "No! Get it out of here! We dying! And my mother said, "If you don't get this damn food up off the floor," because I really could see the rumors were so swift and everything. You didn't know what to believe.
The reason why I say Arthur Ashe is because it actually, the African American community actually had a face that they could connect it with. You know, and you know how the gay community is. I told you that child was gay. Okay, if he was gay, then you need. Whether he was gay or not wasn't the issue. But you know, that's what they said. I knew Arthur Ashe was gay. Ain't no man with no afro like that named gay. You know, they always had to put something in
Yeah, there
there.
had
So
to
it
be
put a
something
face to it for our community. But Rock Hudson and that little boy Ryan White.
Actually, I think Ryan White's death actually broke kind of like the glass ceiling. It was allowing people to get help again.
Get services.
Yeah, because if it wasn't for Ryan White, Ryan White was like the savior for many people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also, just to answer your question as well, in those early days, we all were obsessed with our bodies. Every pimple, every sign of a cold, even an itch would think, oh God, I've got it, I'm dying. You know, I'll be dead by Tuesday.
Yeah. I stopped eating pepper on my food because I was scared to death to sneeze.
Yeah.
I said, Lord, they're going to say something wrong with it. Because that's how it went on.
You know, University of California, San Francisco in 1987. And I remember hitting the wards of San Francisco General Hospital and seeing patients who were HIV positive from time of diagnosis. And we knew that you only had 6 months to live. And then in about 1998, I distinctly remember when the antiretroviral cocktails came along and we began to see people live longer. And then I can time in about the mid-2000s when I began to see patients, I was working at St. Michael's at the time, that had lived more than 20 years, 25 years HIV positive, where you would look at a chart and HIV positive with just 3 letters and a plus. We've come a long way, and I began to reflect that, you know, this isn't the first epidemic that this world has faced, that there's been remarkable medical advances. Like at one point, tuberculosis was considered the same way. We've had a mini one of those with the Ebola virus. And the thing that, when I listen to you all speak, that comes to mind is this tremendous history, and now being in 2015, where we have some data coming out showing that if someone is HIV positive today, and they get on treatment today, that the lifespan is near normal. It basically is normal. It's the same as someone who were non-HIV positive, where we have medications that have reduced the incidence of transmission of HIV to near negative. I mean, there's some studies coming out now showing that if you have two partners and one partner is HIV positive and they're on medications and their viral burden is zero, that they're actually not transmitting the virus. What's happened is this huge cataclysmic change and a younger generation of people who do not have the same fear of HIV. But the stigma is still there. They don't have the fear of HIV, but the stigma is still there. The homophobia is still there. They're still connected historically in communities where there was a maafa, there was a death, there was all this tragedy. And some young people connect with it and some don't. I have this question about the ball community today, particularly amongst the youth in the ball community, and I'm kind of sad that the youth have left. And I have this question particularly for Bernie. When you see young people now on the house balls and there's this whole kind of trend of barebacking or unprotected sex, you know what I mean, and the lack of fear of HIV, what goes through your mind?
What goes through my mind is I'm almost envious of them. I'm gonna be very honest with you. I'm almost envious that you could live your life without worrying about the fear of death knocking at your door. You know, I always hear people say, "Oh, you were a forerunner for all the things that came and all that." But to be honest with you, they're very lucky because they don't have to suffer the pain, the humiliation. It was so devastating. So when I see children today having sex bareback and it's a normal thing to do to some people, I don't go to them and say, you shouldn't do that. I tell them what can come with that. But my version of what can come with that is different from what it was for me when I was 17 years old. You understand what I'm saying? So to be honest with you, if I want to sit here and be honest with everybody, there's almost a little envy that that they don't have to suffer. Like, damn, they ain't going through what we went through. You know, and I'm almost feel happy that they're able to have a sexual freedom and still live. Because they have things like PrEP, there's all these other things that they had. We didn't have those things. It's almost like we only had 3 channels when I was growing up, and everybody got cable. I'm like happy that, oh, you got cable, ooh. Am I a little jealous? I wish I had it, but it is what it is. I think that sex, much like America, we're growing, we're accepting, but there's something about us that we have to keep somebody lower in order for us to be higher. So, if anything, my problem with AIDS and HIV today with the youth is in the same connection with jobs, education, and all these other things. You understand what I'm saying, if I'm making sense? It's not, oh, you shouldn't do that. Well, if you do that, this is what happens. And their first response is, well, I can get medicine. You couldn't.
You know what?
And they do say that.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying as well as Ishmael, but the morbidity report don't lie. Now I'm hearing what you're saying, and yes, they do have access to. They have access to more, to what we had back in those days. But the morbidity rate doesn't lie. They're still. Let me finish. They're still dying. They're still dying. They're still getting infected. Okay. The problem is, as far as where I said, is people aren't accepting the fact that they're dying. It's part of the disease. Now you don't see us running to all these funerals like we used to when they used to have when people died. I mean, the line would be all the way. The line would be from here all the way to City Hall. But I think we have to be very careful, even with that cocktail that they got out there. And I'm not saying I'm for or against the PrEP, but it's out there. And I think that PrEP is very misleading because I know that people are still dying. The numbers are still saying that the infection rates are going up. Okay, you might get one or two that's on that PrEP program, and one's not getting infected. But let's not drop our guard and embrace the fact that we've come so far in this in our medical. Okay, and I, you know what I mean? I work in clinical research as well. So I just retired from clinical research, and I know that the morbidity rate continues to rise.
Yeah, but it's also
even rising quicker with women.
Well, you do know that, like, one of my mentors was one of the pioneers in HIV treatment in the African American community, Dr. Robert Scott. I had a clinic in Zimbabwe where we were bringing older generation HIV medications to a population that didn't have condoms. And we were seeing that there was no perinatal transmission. We were seeing that there was, and we saw this because we were able to see it in a country where you couldn't see it in the United States because it wasn't allowed. Prevention was so strong here. And we weren't seeing the transmission. So there were things that we saw. The fact is now there's a big argument about treatment as prevention. And we know that when people's viral burdens are zero, that they're living. And we know that HIV now, the complications of HIV are ones of comorbidity, substance abuse, poverty, lack of medications.
Yes.
So the real divide now is the money. If you have money, if you have a job, and you have good insurance, and you can get to see a doctor and get medications, you know what I mean, your life expectancy will be great. But the problems in communities of color and dispossessed communities is that does not always happen. And so we still see the deaths. But we're seeing the deaths because of other things like, people saying, why do I have to live anyway? I don't have a job. I'm depressed. Right? Yeah, and so they're not taking medications. And they're allowing themselves to die. And I've seen this because I've worked at a lot of hospitals.
And we're also, but not to cut you off, Doc, but also, too, there's this thing like, I don't know if anybody knows heard about the epidemic of crystal meth. Crystal meth is playing a direct part in the transmission situation because it's a sexual drug that brings out sexual whatever it brings out. Everybody's having sex. Everybody's having sex. Now, are they having safe sex? No, they're not. But people are dying. They have HIV when they die, but that's not what they're dying from. They're dying from depression. They're dying from drug overdoses. They're dying from being poor and uneducated. So a lot of these things now, before AIDS you had AIDS, this is what it was. And at the time, 20, 30 years ago, we wasn't attaching education and poverty to that. We were talking about it, but now it's almost like they run together. They run together. There's no way you could talk about HIV in a black community without talking about education and poverty. There's a dysfunctional family, the father not in the home. You know what I'm saying? All those things are what makes a great ingredient of disaster. And Newark was the perfect city for disaster. We're in pockets amongst the black people. You got the black church that telling you Jesus don't love you because you ain't worthy and the pastor's sleeping with you. So it's not all, but some. Let's keep it 100. Come on now. And that's what was going on. And Newark is still, to this day, one of the hardest cities to crack as far as communication about any sexual situation.
And the thing that I was seeing at St. Michael's, with one of the largest HIV clinics in the country, was, because of the stigma, people coming into treatment so late that they were so sick that you couldn't, the medications are going to work and salvage your immune system at some point. But if you come in too sick, you were just too sick and you would die. And so we still see the deaths. But what's killing people is the stigma. Because there are effective treatments, but we're still dying of the stigma.
And some people are getting sick on purpose to get houses in New York.
Exactly.
Have you ever heard of that?
I agree with you guys with what some of the manifestations are. I agree with that, but we still cannot eradicate and overlook the fact whether they're, and coming from Atlanta, the number one city where for black gay men, okay, you're saying they're coming late. No, they're coming in early. They're still coming in early. Oh yes, it has a lot to do with all of the things that you guys said. Okay, but the bottom line is they're still out there having unprotected sex. Somehow we're still not building people's self-esteem or so where they can get to the point where they say I'm worthy.
But it's
And that,
but it's not
and
set
that,
up to.
and that, no, with that, it comes like you and I speak fire. We had to get to the point where we had to look at the man and the woman. I mean, I understand the social implications of HIV in the African American community, but there also comes a point in time, God bless him, may he rest in peace, but Michael Jackson said it better than anybody, you got to start with the man and the woman in the mirror. And we cannot continuously use the excuses of not having money, because I'll take you back to the beginning of this disease when there was no money, and the only people that took care of these people were people who were volunteering out of the kindness of the lesbian women was taking care of the gay men. Okay, then the gay men got together and we formed a group out in Bergen County called the New Jersey Buddies. So when you care, see what's in a man and a woman's heart has nothing to do with the outside, the externalism of society. It's what's inside of you. I come from a poor family, 10 kids, welfare. So we can't keep continuously using society as the reason why people are not doing what they have to do. Why are you doing what you have to do? Why am I doing what you have to do? You went to die and got a doctor.
I understand that. In 1998, when the antiretrovirals came along, that was a breaking point. That really was a breaking point. Before that, there was money, class didn't make a difference. There weren't effective treatments. It didn't matter class-wise or not, you would die. But 1998 beyond, and that was about the time of Magic Johnson, we began to see people living. And Magic Johnson is a perfect example of that. So beyond 1998, the data and the numbers reflect, and the differences in communities reflect one of money and access to health care, to medications. And as the medications have had fewer and fewer side effects, you know, what Dr. Scott said to me, he said to me, he showed me some data which showed what we knew before 2007 or so, that all the complications of heart disease, lung disease, were diminished tremendously when you started on antiretrovirals at the time of diagnosis. They knew that. The CDC then changed its recommendation. Remember early on, they were recommending that people wait 7 to 8 years to get sick, and their T-cell level, their CD4 counts dropped to a certain point before they even started treatment. We're finding out now that that recommendation early on was just way backward. And there were a lot of people who died because they allowed...
This is a really, really fruitful conversation, but there are folks here who want to ask some questions.
Okay.
We have tons of
yes,
questions.
and we have Empress has arrived. And we have,
Okay.
the performers coming up. So I know that was an interesting debate, and I'm sure people got the gist of some of it, but let's ask some other questions and move on. And Empress is ready, so we have an audience question.
My question's for Bernie.
Hey.
I was really interested when you were talking about, I don't want to get into the rant about the black church, but I really want you to get into
Yeah,
that.
let me tell you about the so-called black church.
Wait a minute.
It's, you know what? I say it with anger, but I really feel sadness. It almost can make you cry, because imagine believing that the one thing that you had in your life that was going to stand fast no matter what was the church that you was raised in and brought up in. My friend Tiger Richards, when I went to his funeral, and the pastor blasted him while he was laying in the coffin and blamed everything on him. He died at 22, 21, and the pastor is chastising the dead man, and the church is saying, amen.
Amen.
And this was normal. This was normal. There were certain times you couldn't even find a pastor, if you were a well-known gay person, they wasn't even coming to preach. They couldn't find nobody to preach. We was preaching at each other's sermon. I didn't know what the hell I was saying. Amen. Put them down. There you go. I didn't know. But the black church is as much fault as Ronald Reagan, Ed Koch, and all the conservatives in the world. I actually have more disgust for the black church because we let our children die. And nobody stood up. Or if you go back and look at all the articles, even now, how much do you see the black church involved in that? You don't even hear them talking about it. The Catholic Church does more for people with AIDS than the black Christian church. We dropped the ball. And hundreds of thousands of people died because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the mothers in the church that faint every Sunday, they may not agree with me. Oh, but we didn't know. But imagine your nephew, and mind you, if everybody know about the church, a lot of times your church is your family you grew up with, your cousins, your aunt, because you all go to the same church. Imagine being ostracized and your mother knowing that you can't come to the church and she still goes to the church and pray. How would you feel when you're dying? You had no one. The black church, if we could take them to court, they get life for murder. It would be murder.
So did you notice like a trend where a lot of like gay black men started denouncing religion or the black church, or were just fed up?
Actually, you know what happened? It got worse. They married women, got the women sick, pretended to be straight, had some kids who were sick, and guess what? Now the epidemic is spread. And and the black church is partly to blame for that. And I mean, I'm sure it wasn't intentional because ignorance is bliss, but they're just as culpable as Ronald Reagan, in my opinion. The black church did nothing, and they still don't. They're great for feeding homeless people. They're good with that. I mean, don't get me wrong, they do some good, but in that area, they get a -0.
Yeah, they haven't changed. My aunt just passed away, and she was one of the sweetest people you ever wanted to meet. And this preacher, her preacher, stood up and says, "I don't care what they say." Now this is my aunt who loved everybody. And my mother looked over at me, and that preacher said, "I don't care what they say. I ain't marrying no 2 women. I ain't marrying no 2 men. I ain't marrying them immoral and illegal." And the church says, "Amen." Mm-hmm. So and he repeated it 3 times.
So we got to be careful when we say, when we talk about the black community and how the white man did this and that. I'm going to say again, and I'm going to stand fast on this.
Yes.
The church is the black church in America is responsible for many, many thousands of deaths. And what happened was, remember, the church has been here for hundreds of years. We didn't know what was going on. So I didn't even judge the people that said, you know what, I'm not going to be gay anymore. I'm getting married. They creep out. They end up dying anyway. And now the wife is sick. You have children that are sick. And I remember when I first started working at University Hospital with Mary Mathis Ford, and I used to go and help her with the children with AIDS. And there were thousands. Now we're down to dozens. Because the drugs and everything. But yes, the black church is culpable for murder. Yes.
Empress
and homelessness, whatever it is that she is asked to do, she's called to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, you'll love her after tonight. You'll love her just as much as we do. Miss Empress Vizcaya. Put your hands together.
Okay. Hip clap.
I did.
said.
Right,
Yes, ma'am.
that's what I was about to say. You know, people can get, and especially young people, they think that it's okay now, but a drug is a drug. And you can get the impression that this is a cure. This is not a cure. This virus has not been cured, and I think that especially the youth, and some adults too, they need to know that. Disease comes around. I can tell you about syphilis and gonorrhea. It never stops. But at least you can cure gonorrhea and syphilis at that time. HIV, there is no cure. Not yet. It's a virus, and it's difficult to cure a virus.
And you know,
and you have to educate the children to know that just because you can take a drug after having sex with someone you think may potentially infect you, that's not a good idea. You cannot live off a drug and still create your same sexual habits.
But it doesn't say, but doesn't PrEP kind of say, let's go be a hoe?
Yeah, and
I'm
that's
just making
because
sure
everybody is very comfortable.
Well, one of the things that I just want to say is PrEP is not new. First of all, let's get that understood. PrEP is not new. PrEP was used in the study with African women. They had a big African women study with PrEP tenofovir. That's the drug that they provided. That's what they're using. That's not something new. I don't know if it gives people permission to be a hoe or not. I think a hoe is a hoe, regardless of what they're going to do. But that's a personal choice that people have to make. That they have. But I think that it could lead to people misunderstanding exactly what it's to do. Because Isabel said earlier that some people are taking it and it's working. So if it's working in some, but it's like anything.
But why would you want to take it? That's my question.
But the shock to me is, this is my shock, is why did they okay it anyway? Why did the FDA okay that drug that quickly?
I'll tell you why. Because despite many, many, many years of prevention efforts, we have seen the rate of HIV increasing in compromised communities, and every prevention method that we tried. There's one study of 200 men who are in a high-risk group, same gender-loving men, gay men, and they were getting syphilis, gonorrhea, so they were having unprotected sex, and the study results revealed that not one came down with HIV.
Okay.
And the thing about it is that for whatever it's worth, what they're showing is that it is protecting people. So it is just one of a number of things in the armamentarium, including prevention, which people use. And it's particularly useful in serodiscordant couples, couples that are, one is HIV positive and one is HIV negative. So it's not as if it's the be-all, end-all. I wouldn't recommend it, and I think that people need to really examine the reasons why they need to take it. But it's saving lives, so.
Well, that's